Did you know that Daniel Craig's final Bond film, No Time to Die, earned $774 million worldwide? Impressive numbers, right? But here's the shocking truth. That figure represents a 33% drop from Skyfall's record-breaking $1.1 billion haul, making it one of the most disappointing conclusions to a beloved Bond era in franchise history. The same actor who revolutionized James Bond with Casino Royale and reached unprecedented heights with Skyfall somehow managed to stumble across the finish line with 2 consecutive films that left fans more frustrated than fulfilled. Armed with a $250 million budget, a 15-year legacy to protect, and the emotional weight of saying goodbye to the longest-serving Bond in cinema history, No Time to Die should have been the triumphant send-off that cemented Craig's legacy as the greatest 007 of all time. Instead, we got a film that killed off the most iconic character in cinema history, dividing the fanbase more than any Bond film since Die Another Day, and proved that even the most successful eras can lose their way when ambition overtakes storytelling. So how did an era that began with the widely acclaimed Casino Royale and peaked with a masterful Skyfall end up stumbling through Spectre and limping to the finish line with No Time to Die? Today, we're going behind the scenes to examine how the Daniel Craig Bond era became a textbook case of diminishing returns and missed opportunities that turned Bond's greatest triumph into his most polarizing conclusion. Reason number 1, the peak that couldn't be matched. The biggest problem facing the latter Craig Bond films wasn't exactly poor filmmaking, it was the impossible task of following Skyfall. Released in 2012, Skyfall didn't just break box office records, it redefined what a Bond film could be. Sam Mendes created a perfect storm of elements: Javier Bardem's terrifying Silva, Roger Deakins' Oscar-winning cinematography, Adele's iconic theme song, and a deeply personal story that explored Bond's origins while delivering spectacular action. Skyfall earned over $1.1 billion worldwide, making it the highest-grossing Bond film of all time, even when adjusted for inflation. Critics praised its blend of classic Bond elements with modern filmmaking, and audiences responded to its emotional depth. The film successfully answered the question of whether Bond was relevant to the 21st century with a resounding yes. But Skyfall's success created an impossible standard for its successors. Every subsequent Craig film would be measured against this masterpiece, and none could capture the same lightning in a bottle. Spectre felt like a retreat into familiar territory after Skyfall's bold innovations, while No Time to Die became so obsessed with topping Skyfall's emotional stakes that it resorted to killing Bond himself. Reason number 2, the Spectre problem. Spectre's most fundamental flaw was its desperate attempt to retroactively connect all of Craig's previous films through the shadowy organization Spectre and its leader Ernst Stavro Blofeld. What should have been a triumphant return of Bond's most iconic villain instead felt like fan service run amok, undermining the individual stories that had come before. The film revealed that Silva from Skyfall, Le Chiffre from Casino Royale, and Dominic Green from Quantum of Solace were all pawns in Blofeld's larger scheme. Worse still, it introduced the cringeworthy twist that Blofeld was Bond's adoptive brother, reducing the sophisticated spy thriller to a family melodrama that nobody asked for. This retroactive continuity destroyed what made the Craig era special in the first place. Casino Royale worked because it was a fresh start, unburdened by decades of franchise baggage. Skyfall succeeded because it told a complete, self-contained story while honoring Bond's legacy. Spectre threw all of that away in favor of a convoluted conspiracy that made the previous films feel smaller and less significant. Christoph Waltz, one of cinema's greatest villains, was wasted as a Blofeld who spent more time explaining his connection to Bond than actually threatening him. The result was a film that felt more like an elaborate piece of fan fiction than a legitimate entry in the series. Reason number 3, emotional fatigue. One of Craig's greatest contributions to the Bond franchise was bringing genuine emotional depth to the character. Casino Royale's heartbreak over Vesper Lynd felt revolutionary after decades of Bond treating women as disposable conquests. Skyfall's exploration of Bond's relationship with M added layers of complexity that the series had never achieved before. But by Spectre and No Time to Die, this emotional approach had become a crutch rather than a strength. Every film needed to find new ways to hurt Bond, new traumas to explore, new relationships to destroy. The character who once seemed invulnerable was now defined entirely by his damage, making him less of a hero and more of a victim. No Time to Die took this to its logical extreme by giving Bond a daughter, only to immediately separate him from her and then kill him before he could have any kind of meaningful relationship with her. The film seemed to believe that more pain automatically meant more depth, but audiences had grown tired of watching their heroes suffer without ever finding peace. Reason number 4. The Blofeld Catastrophe. Ernst Stavro Blofeld is James Bond's greatest enemy, a villain so iconic that he inspired Dr. Evil in the Austin Powers films. The character's return in Spectre should have been a triumph, especially with Christoph Waltz cast in the role. Instead, it became one of the most disappointing villain portrayals in Bond history. The fundamental problem was the film's decision to make Blofeld Bond's adoptive brother, motivated by childhood jealousy rather than the cold, calculating evil that made the character terrifying in the first place. This personal connection stripped away everything that made Blofeld interesting. His role as the head of a global criminal organization became secondary to his petty family grievances. Waltz, despite his considerable talents, never found a way to make this version of Blofeld compelling. His performance felt restrained and underwhelming, especially compared to the scenery-chewing villains that had come before. The organization Spectre felt more like a tech startup than a shadowy cabal, and Blofeld's plan to monitor the world's intelligence agencies lacked that megalomaniacal scope that made previous schemes more memorable. No Time to Die attempted to course-correct by bringing Blofeld back, but the damage was done. The character remained a whiny sibling rather than a master criminal, and his ultimate fate, being accidentally killed by nanobots, felt more like an afterthought than the climactic confrontation between Bond and his greatest enemy that fans deserved. Reason number 5. Diminishing action returns. The Craig era began with Casino Royale's visceral, grounded action sequences that felt genuinely dangerous. The foot chase through Madagascar and the brutal fight in the stairwell were masterclasses in practical action filmmaking that put audiences right in the middle of the violence. Skyfall continued this tradition with the thrilling opening sequence in Istanbul and the intimate final battle at Bond's childhood home. But as the era progressed, the action became increasingly reliant on CGI and impossible stunts that stretched credibility beyond the breaking point. Spectre's opening sequence in Mexico City was visually impressive but felt weightless, lacking the tactile reality that made earlier set pieces so effective. The film's climactic helicopter fight over London was so over the top that it felt more like a video game than a spy thriller. No Time to Die doubled down on this approach with action sequences that prioritized spectacle over storytelling. The motorcycle chase through Italy was beautifully shot, but served no narrative purpose, while the film's climactic assault on Safine's Island felt more like a first-person shooter than a Bond adventure. Reason number 6. The female character problem. The Craig era initially made significant strides in developing strong female characters. Vesper Lynd in Casino Royale was Bond's intellectual equal, while Skyfall's M was given a proper send-off that honored Judi Dench's decades of service to the franchise. These characters felt like real people rather than plot devices or eye candy. But Spectre and No Time to Die largely abandoned this progress. Madeleine Swann, despite being played by the very talented Léa Seydoux, never developed into a compelling character in her own right. She existed primarily to give Bond something to lose, and her relationship with him felt extremely forced and inorganic. The film told us that Bond loved her, but they never showed us why we should care about their relationship. No Time to Die attempted to address this by giving Madeleine more agency and revealing her connection to the villain Safin. But these developments felt like afterthoughts rather than organic character growth. Her decision to betray Bond's location to Safin made little sense given what we knew about her character, and their reunion after 5 years lacked the emotional weight it needed to drive the film's climax. Reason number 7. The Death Trap. No Time to Die's decision to kill James Bond was the most controversial choice in the franchise's 60-year history. And for good reason. The film presented Bond's death as a heroic sacrifice to save his family and the world, but the execution felt more like narrative manipulation than genuine tragedy. The nanobots that ultimately kill Bond were a perfect example of the film's problems. They were simultaneously all-powerful enough to threaten global extinction, but conveniently specific enough to target only Bond and his enemies. The science was so ridiculous that it undermined the emotional weight of Bond's final sacrifice, making his death feel kind of arbitrary rather than inevitable. More fundamentally, Bond's death betrayed everything the character represented. James Bond was supposed to be the man who always found a way out, who survived impossible odds through wit, skill, and determination. By killing him off, the film suggested that some problems are simply insurmountable, which goes against the very essence of what makes Bond heroic. But hey, that's just our opinion. What do you think? Could different creative choices have saved the later Craig films, or was the era always destined to end on a disappointing note after reaching the heights of Skyfall? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into cinema's greatest triumphs and failures. This video is made by movie fans, for movie fans.